At the time of writing, a new potential epidemic has raised its ugly head, namely coronavirus, which, starting in China, is slowly putting out its tentacles to the rest of the world. Whether it will prove to be another storm in a teacup, or in fact be the disease that puts in the final nail of our human coffin, remains to be seen. People in the know, however, are already linking it to the quiet, creeping terror of 5G, whose radiation is already making itself known in various parts of the world, including the UK. Those who are welcoming this ghastly aberration as a wonderful addition to their mobile phone attributes are rather like the man who found the electric chair a comfortable place to sit down. We know from a non-mainstream, of course, TV programme put out a few months ago by a man who played a big part in the development of 5G that it was originally intended as a lethal weapon to be targeted at unsuspected enemy troops. Poor devils. It seems that the unsuspecting victims now, apart from the public at large, are town councillors, who have been duped into thinking 5G is a wonderful new means of spying on the population, hence the, up to recently, deafening silence on the subject, not realising they are signing their own death warrants as well as ours. As intimated earlier, the ultimate objective of the cretins, one of the more principal names I have for them, really running the show, is to reduce rather than for now totally annihilate the human race. They are presumably relying on a certain amount of the population surviving this medical Armageddon if it works this time in the way intended. Either way, they always have that other horseman of the apocalypse, war, up their sleeve. The first victim of war being, as we have often heard, the truth. It is difficult to know just how successful past ones have actually been in the eyes, if they have any, of the cretins, who have undoubtedly been totally involved in starting all wars since man first picked up a lump of wood to hit a rival with. Somebody once said he did not know exactly how World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be with sticks and rocks. We certainly have the nuclear, chemical and biological means to completely wipe ourselves out many times over, and it often seems the military cannot wait to try out each new lethal toy the scientists and armament magnates come up with, much to the delight of the cretins. Again, if war is the final blow that achieves their aims, the required survivors will of course stay for the duration in their underground bunkers. Eventually they too will disappear when there are enough robots to replace them. It is hard to understand how even now most people on this planet in fact, do not seem able to see what is happening, and indeed has been happening for eons. Surely they can't have not noticed how certain people always seem to come out of every catastrophe that much wealthier. Catastrophes, if the truth were known, they helped bring about. And that these people invariably run or own mega companies and banks that are gradually swallowing up all smaller rivals, and that such people, especially in the USA it has to be said, invariably attain the highest political clout, putting them in the position to disproportionately favour their own companies in awarding mega contracts and the like. Meanwhile the poor get desperately poorer and the middle classes get phased out. There is no question in my mind as a practising accountant that each successive government, though inevitably stating that they wish to help small businesses, are doing their darndest to indeed help them into the grave. Over the last few years in the UK, we have seen a long succession of legislation enforced on them, all at their own often not inconsiderable expense. How the cretins love that concept. More and more of the previously fairly simple tasks have now to be done on complicated computer programs, with large fines if you get it wrong, and no apologies that HM Revenue and Customs are getting increasingly unhelpful, many due to fierce cuts in manpower, and unaware themselves of how the so-called system in question is supposed to work. The whole idea, of course, is to end up with a new world order, serviced by robots in a small number of gigantic worldwide organisations. There will no longer be any room for the self-employed. Nobody will be able to, or presumably have the need to, travel other than from their cell-like dwellings in their driverless cars, with no choice where they're going, only to their places of work. There is already a drive to get people out of the rural areas and to ultimately have them all cordoned off in major towns and cities where those that are still here, will be the easiest to control. Towards this end, certainly in this part of the UK, there is a notable number of high-rise buildings suddenly springing up, especially in nearby Milton Keynes. While I was working in Luton for a time 4 or 5 years ago, a new building suddenly started going up only a short distance from the offices I worked in. I was able therefore to observe its progression upwards, and was amazed to see how they built it. Instead of a steel skeleton or obvious reinforced concrete structure, they seem to be simply stacking up shoebox-shaped units, something like ship containers, and presumably bolting them together. Somebody said the building, I counted 9 stories in all, was to house students. The thought that kept going through my mind as I watched it going up day after day was, they're not apartments, they're cells. Having always been interested in the older skyscrapers of New York City, a work colleague of mine who knew this, not difficult as my various offices have long been decorated with large posters of my favourite buildings, the Empire State, Chrysler, Woolworth, etc., lent me a fascinating book a few years ago. The book dealt with the financial aspect of the various building phases that have taken place in New York over the past decades, and how it ties in with the city's various financial problems, indeed occasional bankruptcy scenarios. It made the point in particular that at the time of writing, the book was brand new, about 5 years or so ago, most of the huge new office buildings in downtown Manhattan were never more than 50% occupied, and yet they were continually bringing more and more office space onto the market. This certainly seems crazy, and every time I see a new picture of the city, there are always new, sometimes truly colossal buildings I hadn't seen before. It is also the case, apparently, that some of the older, often iconic skyscrapers, which were built as speculative office buildings, are now being converted to residential use. A good example is the beautiful 1932 950-foot tower at 70 Pine Street, the tallest building in downtown Manhattan until the World Trade Center was built. It was built as the city's service building, was eventually the American International Building, and since their demise, its 66 floors are now, I gather, residential after a major overhaul. How, we may ask, are they going to achieve this seeming mass emigration from the country to the cities? Needless to say, the writing is very much on the wall. Take a look at what has been happening around the world, most graphically recently Australia. Even the mainstream news can't disguise the fact that an ecological disaster on an unprecedented scale has and is taking place there. The tool used there has been fire, but other places around the world can be cited where similar massive scale destruction of the ecosystem is happening by floods and other so-called acts of God, acts of the cretins more like. Not only is the weather clearly being manipulated by the minions of the cretins in such places as the HAARP installations in Alaska, New Zealand and elsewhere, but in the USA, for example, countless private farmlands, the homesteads of families for generations, have been deliberately destroyed by damming rivers and other means, which both facilitates the removal of the rural communities and also the scope to unload onto us genetically modified muck known laughably as food. As I write this essay, we are yet again being subjected in the UK to storm after storm and mega flooding in parts of the country. It was interesting to hear a spokesman for the National Farmers Union being interviewed on TV saying it was all very well sparing the big towns by building flood defences, but all the floods are drowning the farmlands. At the same time as suitable accommodation is being made available for the future slaves, so also it is being made for dissidents, anyone who dares or even thinks about defying the masters of the New World Order. Quietly, in hidden away locations, large camps are already standing waiting and no doubt being added to. From aerial photographs, these resemble pictures I have seen of the Dachau and other Nazi concentration camps, only with rows and rows of end-to-end mobile home-type trailers crammed into far tighter lines than would ever be the case in holiday camps. Somehow I doubt they contain the luxury furnishings and appliances typical of the holiday camps I've stayed at either. The news coming now out of China, even since I began work on this essay a week or so ago, is that as a result of the coronavirus epidemic, whole cities are now being quarantined, so the inmates, for that is what they certainly are now, are unable to leave. How very convenient. China has long been held up as the model for the New World Order by those in the know. I remember a while back seeing on TV a clip of film showing Chinese soldiers marching. I know well-drilled soldiers can march remarkably together, almost like a well-oiled machine, but this was something else. They really did look like robots, identical in every way, and it's hard to put into words, but there was a chillingly mechanised way they marched. It is my intention, as last time, to complete this essay with a meaningful dream I had, but before that I just wanted to say a few words about positive thought. In the Duane quotation earlier in this essay, the guide warns us against this. This may at first sight seem to go against my going on record in an earlier essay about how helped I had been by the use of positive affirmations. There is, however, no divergence of opinion here. Discussing the matter with Kevin a while back clarified my thoughts on the matter. Basically, it is a case of be careful what you wish for. In other words, do not affirm for things that might only be achievable in a future life, because you are inevitably creating a mega tap line that will drag you back into such a life once again on this planet, the very thing we are trying to avoid. My only regular positive affirmations are now as follows. 1. The real universe loves and protects me and mine and our loved ones always. 2. I'm happy and healthy and fit and well and perfect in every way. 3. I always have enough money for what I want to do. 4. I love and forgive myself for everything I do and have ever done. It is always possible some elements even in the above could be construed as tap-line material, but in view of historic amazing results so far, I am not unduly concerned by this, I think, remote possibility. So to end now with the promised dream, it is I think my favourite dream of all time, and was the subject of one of the UK Skypes a few months back. I think it is appropriate to share it again here as a good indication of what you can achieve on the real side, and perhaps to lighten the otherwise rather sombre discourse. Dream. A few nights ago I had the most amazing and exciting dream I can ever remember. It started off unremarkably enough. I appeared to be in some kind of big basement with numerous others milling about. I did not see their faces nor hear them speak. It was fairly dark, but I could see at least 2 sets of stone stairs of maybe 10 or more steps leading up to doorways to the outside. People, including me, were occasionally going up one or other set of stairs, looking out and coming back down again. When I looked out, it was a beautiful sunny day, and there appeared to be an area of grass leading out to some nearby hilly area. There was a general feeling of apprehension in the basement. Some enemy or malevolent group were anticipated and expected to appear over the nearest hill at any time. Then I was standing still in the basement, confronted by a large vertical trapdoor. It was not solid, but rather resembled a single old-fashioned bedstead, but with a mass of criss-crossing wires rather than springs. 2 men in front of me pushed it upwards and exited, so I followed suit, out into the glorious sunshine, with no longer any thoughts of menace approaching. Arguably what happened next was a different dream, but there was no obvious break, and it seemed to just follow seamlessly on. It was, however, now dark, and I was up in the air, flying above some small town or village centre. I was quite high up, but could see lots of human activity down below, so I assumed it was a winter's late afternoon or evening, though I had no impression of it being cold. For the next few minutes of the dream at least, I found I could decide what to do and where to go, rather than just going with the flow of the dream. I think this probably makes this part of the events at least a lucid dream. Either way, I decided to dive down to just above the people's heads, and nobody seemed to see me. I then soared upwards and spent a certain amount of time shooting away in different directions, dive bombing and hurtling upwards, hither and thither, like an out-of-control UFO, although I was perfectly in control and loving every minute of it. I had had the odd flying dreams over the years, but nothing like as exciting or as long as this one. Also, everything seemed so vivid and clearer than normal dreams, like comparing HD with normal TV. I found myself away from the town centre and flying up a residential street. The only person around was a little old lady walking along. In a moment of devilment, I dived down and dropped on the pavement sidewalk. Behind her, no reaction. I gently pushed her back, still nothing. I felt no contact either, so I got the impression we were not in the same plane of existence, which would explain why nobody else seemed to be able to see me earlier. I zoomed back up into the sky and continued my roller coaster activity. Suddenly I found I was flying up a long, dimly lit corridor in a long building, possibly a school. At the end of the corridor, in the doorway, I recognised Dwayne as he appears on the front of this book 7 in a blue suit. Behind him stood 2 or 3 figures. They were rather in the shadows, so I could not make out any features, although I felt they were all male. I dropped down to the floor in front of him. He smiled at me and made some encouraging remark, which I could not recall waking up later on. We bid each other goodbye and I flew off, back up the corridor and out up into the sky once more. Hovering for a moment and considering where to go next, I was suddenly aware of Kevin hovering next to me. He said something about there being something of interest to see at the railroad station, so we set off for it and I woke up. I peered at the clock. It was about 3 a.m. I was in a state of total euphoria and could not get over the exhilaration and excitement I had just experienced. I told myself, "You've just visited the real universe, old son," an impression that was later to be refuted by those more in the know. It was evidently just the astral level. That could, however, not take away that wonderful experience, and Dwayne told me it was the real guides effectively giving me a booster. He added that the first part of the dream signified rising above the physical and in effect moving into a higher level. That's the end of the dream and of this essay. I hope you enjoyed listening to it, and thanks for so doing. And just remains for me to do the New You song and then wish you goodbye. New You, you,